Welcome back to Raised by Giants, where we talk all things spirituality. I'm Ryder Lee. Tonight we have returning guest, former U.S. Army Intelligence Security Command and the Defense Intelligence Agency's Directorate of Science and Technology, Dr. David Morehouse, speaking about the history of the Stargate Project, SRI, international psychic assassins, and much more. But before I introduce him, check out Raised by Giants on Rokfin. It is a completely uncensored platform. Go over there, set up a free account, get all of my regular content I post here on YouTube, and sign up for Rokfin's premium content, which is far less than a YouTube premium account, at only $10 a month. And you'll get all of my premium uncensored content when it gets released, and all of the other creators' premium content as well, like Beyond Classified, Charlie Robinson, Jay Dyer, Zero with Sam Tripoli, Tinfoil Hat, Eddie Bravo, and Rex Bear Leak Project, and much more. Check the link in the description to sign up for the video streaming platform, Rokfin. Also, check out C60 Purple Power. It is the most powerful antioxidant on the planet, helps with energy levels, skin problems, infections, eyesight, brain cognition, EMF radiation, and a lot more. It's a free radical sponge that gives your body the ability to heal itself. And if you use promo code GIANTS10 from the link in the description, you'll get 10% off your entire purchase. I highly recommend it. I've been using it for over a year with my own money, and I wouldn't recommend something that doesn't work. Introducing tonight's returning guest, Dr. David Morehouse. From 1987 to 1991, David Morehouse was assigned to several highly classified special access programs in the U.S. Army's Intelligence Security Command and the Defense Intelligence Agency's Directorate of Science and Technology as a top secret spy, a remote viewer, an Army Ranger, master parachutist, pathfinder, scuba diver, and special operations soldier. His distinctive military skills place him in a select group of Army officers. He holds a Master of Military Art and Science degree, a master's degree in administration, and a doctorate in education, and the recipient of numerous military awards and decorations. He is the author of many books, including bestseller Psychic Warrior, written in 14 different languages. Hello, and welcome back to the show, Dave. I appreciate you for coming back on. Hasn't been too long since our last interview, but how have you been?
Oh, good. I'm really very honored to be here with you, Ryder, and with your listeners. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. I really dig the integrity of your show and of you as an interviewer. So yeah, I'm happy to be back. Thank you.
Yes, I had to bring you back on fast because I'm figuring more and more out with researching these projects, and from listening back to our very first interview, I wanted to follow up on some things. But since we got more into the history of remote viewing last time, I think it's important to get into the history of the Army Intelligence and the DIA Stargate Project, though we did get into it a little bit, some of that last time, but it was more about your experiences within the unit. And I've done some research on the things that you said about it, and I did find out that the CIA was indeed funding SRI International directly through Sidney Gottlieb. So when SRI formally separated from Stanford University in 1970, I believe that was, it became known as SRI International. And I just had Dale Graff on in the other day, and he said that the research started at SRI in 1972. And I'm trying to figure out if that is when the CIA started that funding, but he mentioned that it only lasted for 2 years. And from my research, they, it had to have lasted for a longer period of time than that. But I'm just trying to figure out if the funding actually started when SRI became founded, I believe, in 1947, or if it wasn't until SRI formally split from Stanford in 1970 when the funding actually began.
I'm with caveat. Or rather with a preamble here. I'm not the best historian of what took place in the research lineup. I've read everything that anybody has written about it, and I find some discrepancies in a lot of the versions of the story. I think if you read the Ingo Swann story about remote viewing, that's probably more close, or closer rather, to the center line of reality in this story. There are a lot of different story arcs by a lot of different people. And we have to remember that everybody's got an interpretation, and that interpretation is, moment to moment for them through their lens of their eyes, where they were, what they were doing. And they can come out of a room with the 5 other people and they have a different version, slightly different version of what happened there. And it's truth with this. That is just the fundamental baseline with this, that everybody has a little bit of the puzzle, but not the total picture. I'm not going to ask you to let me presume that I have the total picture, because I don't. But as a former military trained remote viewer, I did look through the historical files. That was like your first assignment when you got there. When you got there to the unit for training, what they said to you is, well, to me, they took me over. It was probably the only thing that was organized in what they were doing. And they dropped me to a file safe, and they said, opened it up, pulled up the first file and said, read from here. And when you get to the last file on the 4th drawer, then we'll talk about starting your training. We'll give you theory and start your training. So I read everything because I was completely taken aback by what this unit was and the idea that I was part of it. I mean, I didn't yet know a lot of things, but I knew that I was part of something very unique, something very controversial, and I guess to a degree historical and special in a way. And I just kind of sensed that. So I read everything, every word, top to bottom. And there was a lot of information in there about when things started and when things ended and who was paying for what, and et cetera, that would be known as it filtered through DIA. I am absolutely certain, based on what I've read and interpreted, that, and even what I've read in open source, is that the CIA, through Gottlieb, father of MK Ultra and other nefarious programs, that he was the CIA funding, because of his job in the science and research branch of the CIA, that he was the one that was the funding channel. It came through his office, his branch in the agency, and it was 20 years plus in the paying of that. Why different people are turning around and going, oh no, it was only 2 years, and then it was, oh, somebody else took it over and somebody else did this. I mean, let's all agree that, yeah, maybe that happened, but let's also ask, what would be the ulterior motive in turning around and trying to make everybody believe that? I mean, it existed for 20 plus years, and 72 is when it started. And it's when it started. And people who were in that agency, who were part of that, in interviews to multiple books, have said that it was started and it was funded through the CIA, et cetera. And none of them have turned around and supported what Graf or maybe some others have said, which is, oh, it was only 2 years. I don't understand why somebody would be saying that, because the entire time, even when I was there in the mid 80s, there was still work being done with SRI. Well, somebody was funding SRI, and the CIA
Exactly.
would not have gone in there and then pulled out. What CIA would have done, maybe, is go in there, get the ball rolling, and then loop the funding around through something else like INSCOM or something else to pay SRI. But SRI didn't work for free. They're contractors. They
Yep.
live on the next grant and the next contract. They would never have done that. They would have, oh, well, we'll just keep going on with this because we think it's cool. That's not how that works. So, but we do know that the agency is notorious for masking funding channels. They'll like light the fuse on something, and when they light the fuse on it and it gets running in a direction that they're okay with, they'll loop the funding and push it through something else. Because I was told this by a high-ranking CIA agent, who I apologize for mentioning that and then not being able to provide you with a name, but I just flat forgot, in the years, or what his name was, because it was a brief meeting. But I was told, that our, kind of our motto, unspoken motto, is always keep somebody between you and the problem. Always keep somebody between you and the problem, because then you have plausible deniability. Well, we weren't directly involved in that. We were just funding it. They were supposed to be oversight and research it. We're just checking in once in a while, or something of that ilk. And that was what I was told by a CIA officer who was involved in not this, but in some other things when I was working as a strategic deceiver. And that becomes part of tradecraft. If you really want to think about it that way, is keeping somebody between you and the problem. You never want to have to take responsibility for anything that's going to be controversial, or anything that can find you out, or anything that can damage you or the agency. You have to protect the agency. So keep somebody else between you and the problem. So they would maybe not have overtly and directly linked themselves through that. And that may be a story that Targ and Dale Graff are presenting now as part of the oral history, highly interpretive oral history of what happened.
Yeah, it
But
doesn't make any sense
makes
that
no sense.
the CIA would stop funding. Now, I did, through my research, find out that SRI did lose its funding from the CIA for a period of time when the CIA split Pat Price from SRI in 74 or around 74, 75 to work with the CIA directly, which does correlate to what Dale Graff is saying from the research started at SRI funded by the CIA in 72. And then around 74, 75, it cut the funding for a period of time. But uh, SRI was always a contractor for the government. Now, according to what?
Can I comment on that?
Yes.
I I don't see that as acting as a federal contractor, which I have been trained to do now, and as a federal contracts manager. I do not buy into that for a second. That uh, Pat Price was the only show in town, and that the agency would have put the money wherever Pat Price went, and then disengage from SRI. I think that that's kind of either double speak, or it's just ignorant speak by the guys, telling that, or because Pat Price came out of the SRI adventure and journey. And so if he came over, there may have been a piece of funding that was withdrawn in order to pay Pat Price or develop the whatever it was they were going to do with Pat Price. But it makes no sense to me that they would have withdrawn that contract, because it was a sole source contract. Now, a sole source contract typically only goes for about 7 years. What goes base year and then 5 option years, so 6 years. But it can be renewed. It just typically isn't, but the agency could do whatever they wanted to do, probably. They're federal contractors, are not necessarily federal contracting officers. I'm sure they don't act like them anyway. So they would have been able to continue to sustain that and brought, Price out as a separate entity for whatever purpose the agency decided they were going to use him for, and extracted that element of the funding as like direct labor or other direct costs, something else, and pull it out and plug it into Pat Price. But I know, SRI continued to research. They continued to do psychical research. So
and that's an
who the
important
hell
thing
was paying for it?
yeah, and that's an important thing for people to understand too. The Stargate project was also running congruent with SRI. SRI was continuing its research all through the time that the DIA and the Army was also doing their remote viewing and psychic project as well. I think this is where a little confusion comes in with people, just kind of getting into, what we're talking about is SRI. It's important to note that SRI and the Stargate project are two separate entities, though they were kind of running congruently there for a while.
Yeah. And the Ingo Swan, which it's out there as a PDF. It's online somewhere. It's Ingo Swan's, not his, not his book on ESP or any of that kind of stuff. It's him in his last years, lining out everything that he was aware of about where funding came from, et cetera, et cetera. And, and where, like the American Institute of Psychical Research, out there before some of this other stuff, which probably was not as pure and organic as we would like to think that it may have been. Edgar Casey and other folks that are out there. I mean, I'm sure that they had their own sources of revenue that they had constructed within their organizations, right? But those organizations, if they were really doing something and writing about something or speaking about something that about enhanced human performance potentials, or about developing ESP, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, et cetera, in people, out-of-body experiences, there's no way that those organizations existed in purity and had not been infiltrated, and probably on some level, might have been a low level. And they may not even have known that the donation or the money that they were getting was coming from the agency. But the agency would have had its tentacles in that kind of work. Why? Because we know they were interested in it. They were interested in it before MK Ultra ever started. They were interested in it. Right? We agree?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So those things, like, all those different institutes that were there, that mostly out on the West Coast in California, that everybody saw as these organic kind of new age research and other stuff, few people have ever looked at and said, okay, who paid for all this? How did you create these organizations and institutes and pay? Because the people that were in charge of those lived wealthy lives. They were not, I'm done working now, so I'm going to go out and, on my beggar's bowl and eat, kind of thing. They were living powerfully supported lives in those places and running these organizations and institutes to do things. And all of these scientists that we keep talking about, all of them were poking in here and coming out over there. They were all dabbling, everybody dancing in everybody else's soup bowl on occasion, back and forth doing things. And the agency is the only thing that would have been there that would have had deep enough pockets and money that it could obscure from public view, and or money that it could plug into institutions that the institution's owners wouldn't even, or managers, board of directors would not even have known where the money was coming from. To them, it may have been a donor, just a donation, or somebody coming in and saying, I really love this work. I want to give you $150,000, and come back in 2 months later and do the same thing. That is a strategic strategy that would have been done. It's, if you doubt any of that, read the history of the OSS and read, the assessment of men, read anything you can about these experimental programs in the agency, and the thousands of people that were scooped up, witting some and unwitting completely others, scooped up and tested, poked, prodded, interrogated. I mean, tortured, all these things, American citizens. And did you ever once see a van pull up that has said Central Intelligence Agency on the side? They threw them in and took them away. No. So it's a very, very secret organization, as we all know, with many, many, many layers. And it got out of, it's a dog that got off a leash at the end of World War II. And when Truman was trying to keep a lid on it and trying to keep them relegated to a single floor in a building that was within walking distance of the Oval Office, the CIA created itself. Truman didn't, nor did his successor. It just became an animal that designed its own mission creep and found its own methods and ways and justifications for funding, and decided what it was going to fund and how it was going to fund it. And so
it almost seems like the CIA is a direct copy of the OSS. Like they just picked up everything from the Office of Strategic Services and then just
that was where it came from. That was they just changed the acronym. I mean, they changed the name. But read it. There's a book that's rare, but you can find it, called The Assessment of Men. I think that it's a really tremendous insight into the mind of the individuals that headed up this kind of organization and how they decided to categorize human beings to play certain roles within the organization. It's a fabulous book. Every leader or investigator should read it.
It's definitely possible that the three-letter organizations were funneling money through a specific
Absolutely.
person to make that donation to anything that they wanted to make the donation to. In this case, would be SRI. They were doing that with Sidney Gottlieb. They were giving Sidney Gottlieb the money, and then Sidney Gottlieb was in turn funding SRI, but really it was the CIA funding it. And then also, I've researched into Dr. Verona too. Dr. Verona was high up in the DIA at the time, and he was also
chief scientist of the DIA. He was my senior rater.
He was also funding SRI as well, personally, in the beginning years in the 70s too. So we have all these. They're funneling money through specific people to be able to fund SRI, the Stanford Research Institute International, right, to study these psychics and remote viewers and ESP abilities.
Yeah, and to allegedly, first deliverable to prove, utilizing scientific method that this ability exists within humans. Prove it. And they did, which is why funding continued. And the proof that they offered was actually audited. As I told us in the last time we talked, that the CIA turned around and audited it, because they weren't going, again, keeping with the mantra of keep somebody between you and the problem, put auditors in there from independent agencies, put them in there, audit their science, and tell us if what they're saying is real or did they make it up. And these were primary research labs that came in and audited, like SAIC and Pear Labs and other, labs that probably thought that they should have had that contract. So they would have come in there with a chip on their shoulder. But scientist to scientist, they didn't criticize it. They came back and said, it's good science. We just think there are some things they can modify. And they put those in writing. And so the agency was good. And it continued. So again, not to backtrack too deeply here, but to have a scientist and or an administrator start saying things like, well, funding was unplugged because Pat Price went to the agency, and then later it was plugged back in because Pat Price died. That makes no sense.
Well, to clear that up,
I understand that's what you're seeing, but it makes no sense from a funding and
Well,
contract perspective.
well, to clear that up, Dale didn't say that that was the reason that it stopped. That was me putting that together from listening to Russell Targ, all of Russell Targ's interviews and everything. I've been really, trying to get
I
a hold
see.
of anything that I could possibly say. But I just wanted to clear that he didn't say that that was specifically the reason that the funding stopped. That's
Did
just
he
what
give a reason?
uh, I don't think that I think that he did, but I can't remember exactly what he said about it. But it kind of makes sense that maybe it was a contract that this is just my own personal opinion. Maybe it was like it was time for the contract to be renewed between the CIA and SRI, and then there was a period of time that lapsed. And then the reason that they're saying there's a period of time that lapsed in between them re-signing the contract to get more funding, and then they used the excuse that maybe it had something to do and involved with Pat Price, and they used that as a cover, and then that people could say that the funding stopped from the CIA, even though that it did pick back up. I mean, Russell Targ has said that it resumed, that they got the funding resumed from the CIA after Pat Price's death. Now, that's just his testimony. There's not any verifiable things that that I
Sure.
can come to actually find real documentation that says that. But there is real documentation that says that that Sidney Gottlieb was funding SRI from
Yeah, but just to go back and address that logic stream there, contracts are usually terminated because the government no longer needs the services, or they terminate them for cause and go find somebody else to do the work because you didn't meet the deliverables. So to just stop all of a sudden with no reason given does not make contracting or research funding sense.
Well,
And
let me play
then,
devil's advocate here, just a little bit.
sure,
Sorry for interrupting, but Pat Price was known to be one of the most accurate psychics and remote viewers ever, right? So if they did in fact split him from SRI in 74 or 75, I'm not clear on the dates because there isn't any exact dates. There's basically no information about Pat Price on the internet. Very difficult to find
yeah,
information. You have to listen to interviews and other
make
people
note of
talking
that.
about.
Yeah,
And
make note of that. There's a reason. Right.
and exactly, there is. But if they did split Pat Price from SRI and he was their guy, right? He was the one that could see anything anywhere in the world. He was this very accurate remote viewer. Then it
Well,
would
don't
make.
overselling too much.
I'm not oversight. I'm just trying to build a story and let people kind of know who he is. So if they did indeed do that, which I think that they did, then that could be a reason to terminate the contract for a period of time, or maybe again it's some kind of renewal of the contract and the time lapsed there, and then when he died, they resumed.
Yeah.
They
See, that's
resumed.
the piece that constantly takes me back to the logic argument on it. I hear what you're saying, but it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense, even in the logic, as I said, in the research funding or the agency's overall goals. The agency's goals were not to find Pat Price and then milk him for everything they could get out of him. The agency's goals were to create an intelligence collection methodology, right? They wanted to know if human beings could do this, and they wanted to know which human beings could do it, and they wanted to know if it could be trained or replicated. Those were their big three primary objectives here. So because they find one guy, the idea that they would then just like chop the funding line of that would be incongruent with their methods, incongruent with their objectives, incongruent just contract management. They would have, maybe reduced the contract funding and even then, I mean, to bring Pat Price over and use him and pay him, right? Or to have somebody as a handler and a targeter or analyst or anything else, that's that's not even what they spend in toilet paper at the agency in a day. It's like that makes no sense that they would cancel the contract to do that. Go, we have our boy now. So
But also
the
keep in mind too, the Stargate project wasn't a project at that time and hadn't started yet
I understand that.
in 74.
I understand. My point is that the funding would have been managed through some other channel. And I don't think that the guys that are saying it was cut off were guys that were probably really understood. Well, it was because it, put off in his own words talks about where, funding came in from this place or that place. So if that funding, I'm just making the argument
Absolutely.
that from what I know of the agency and what I know of the goals and the objectives at that particular point in time and the things that they were truly afraid of, the idea that somebody else would get this and they wouldn't have it, they were not going to let that distill down to just Pat Price. Use him or figure him out, but still fund research to accomplish the objective. So maybe that research was unplugged and then run through different directions, through different assets. And that's the way they work. So I'm going to stick with that theory that that's what happened. And I understand that somebody would say it would be done. I know you don't want to belabor that. You want to move on. I just don't want, I don't want that. That story does not mesh with what I've read and who I've talked to and those kinds of things. But I have not talked to Targ and I've not talked to Graf. So I don't know from their perspective.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get to the bottom of it and try and put a bunch of things together, and
I think it's
figure it
just
out.
safe for you to say if the agency grabbed hold of something, it's going to stay, it's going to milk it for everything it's worth.
Right.
If they
I
put
mean,
it,
I 100% agree that the funding continued, right?
yeah,
Absolutely. It definitely did. It had to have. If it didn't, then who was funding it, right? There's no way that it lasted, that amount of time with no funders. They wouldn't just be doing it for the fun of it, just like what you said earlier,
exactly.
right? So it had to continue. I was just, trying to figure out if it did indeed stop for a little bit there in the early 70s, and maybe the cover was something to do with Pat Price's death and something like that, which I'm not 100% sure on, but I know for sure from researching and going through all of it that it did continue for another 20 years, that the CIA was
At least,
indeed
at least
indeed
that. Yeah.
funding SRI. So how many did any of these SRI people from that was being funded by the CIA, did any of them come over into the DIA's, well, Army intelligence in the beginning, Stargate project? Were
You mean
any
like
of
walk through the door of those ramshackle buildings where we were doing the work? Absolutely not.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
In fact, I never saw Dale Graff, and I was in the 3 years that I was there. So I never saw him. I mean, I think I met him the first time when I was, ending ETSing out of there to go to the strategic deception unit. I came back and there he was. That's the first time I'd ever seen him. And I know there are lots of people who claim that they've been in the unit. John Alexander, for example, and others. But I was there every day. I never had a sick day. So I was there every day. I never saw one of them. And I do know that while I was there, when we were working, there was interface and joint projects with SRI. I
So
know that.
they were contracting SRI in some sort of fashion.
The SRI was continuing to do research, and the kinds of targets that we would typically do as these joint research projects with them. And I know this because Fern Gavin would sit us all down around the conference room and say, with our partners out in the West, who else was it? Some dude ranch or what? With our partners out in the West, meaning SRI International, we're going to participate in a joint experiment with them, as support their continuing research into what we're doing, words to that effect. And he used the term outbounder. And outbounder was a term that was coined at SRI. It was later changed in the unit to be a beacon. Beacon targets imply what you're doing in a beacon target. They were practicing and trying to perfect the ability for remote viewers to go into an altered state of consciousness and to track and find, to track down, locate an individual, and then to see through that individual, like connect with the waveform expression of that individual and sense what they were thinking, perceive what they were doing, perceive where the environment in which they're doing it, and a myriad of other things, which were later years designed as like seed questions or focus questions and all that kind of thing for like extended remote viewers. But we would do those, and they would always call it an outbounder exercise, and we would always call it a beacon exercise. Right? So we would do that, and the idea is you're not supposed to attempt to influence that individual. If you track them, find them, and then see through them, you can. Some people would carry the concept of being able to kind of step into that individual to sense and perceive. But remember, that's not actually happening. We're talking about detecting, decoding, and objectifying waveform. Okay. They're not physically stepping into this guy. They're not physically leaving the remote viewing room across the parking lot. They're going into an altered state of consciousness, tapping into the unconscious mind, where they lock in on this beacon and they begin to detect, decode, and objectify data through that beacon or around that beacon. So two different concepts are taught. One is to see through the beacon, and the other is to kind of stand off and look at see the beacon. So you'll see sketches from remote viewers of a shape, a human shape standing somewhere looking at things, looking at buildings or in a meeting or doing something else. And we called them beacons, and again, they called them outbounders. Now, I never saw the results of this, but it was being done. And according to Fern, it was being collected up. He was doing his analysis on it and then sending it forward to them for their comparison with what their viewers were doing, or whatever they were calling them at the time. They didn't ever really use the term remote viewer because they weren't really part of DT-S other than, this occasional arc to connect for research purposes. Now, I don't know if doing that brought funneling in from CIA through DIA, or if it was just CIA direct research monies to continue to explore this and to compare, how, we were kind of seen as an independent organization, finding our own way. I think that kind of was like the reason for this title of Tailgraph's book, which I think sold like 325 copies. I'm not sure, but Trails Through the Psychic Wilderness, or Path Through the Psychic Wilderness. I mean, we were blazing that trail. We were operational viewers working, on actual intelligence targets. I don't know if that was happening at SRI International. I also don't know if the agency itself had its own set of trained viewers. I would assume that they probably did. I don't see them putting all their eggs in one basket. That's dangerous in the intel community.
I don't know why.
Especially,
I don't understand why they wouldn't be trying to collect data information at
of course,
intelligence
yeah,
data at SRI. It's being funded by the CIA and the DIA being funneled through a bunch of different people. So I don't see why they wouldn't be
nor do I, unless
researching.
the intention there was to maintain the purity of research, right? To be able to justify the money, I'm sure that in justifying the money, that the idea there was we're researching, we're testing, we're building, we're discovering, we're publishing, we're providing information to you about how to enhance this program. And the program began at a time, like I think we talked about it last time we talked, that where the government, the military, the CIA were open to this kind of stuff. And so funding it as a potential intelligence collection methodology, even what they claim that it was $20 million. I mean, that's nothing. Spread $20 million spread out over 20 years that the CIA would pay an independent research agency to research this for them. How many of us think that that's bullshit? $20 million. I think not. I think not. But they establish a number that they think that people are not going to get too crazy about when they turn around and go, yeah, we did it, but we're not going to do it anymore. Which was, as with everything else you say, and which is truthful, which is that's a smoke screen. That's just a diversion. So everybody looks over here and goes, oh, it was only $20 million. It was 20 some odd years. Why get our panties in a wad over something like that? Yeah, okay. So they read the newspaper article and they let it go. No big deal. Government screwed up again. CIA doing weird crap. And people think that it's just dead. It's not dead. It was too valuable to them. It was just valuable as anything else,
So for my research into SRI, in the beginning, there's a few people that were stated to be a part of the SRI research team. And one of the people I'm not sure of, because I'm pretty sure that Joe McMoneagle was in the Stargate Project, and he wasn't a part of SRI. But some of these sites list Joe McMoneagle as being a part of the SRI research team, along with Uri Geller, Ego Swan, and Pat Price.
I mean, he very well could have been. I've never heard that. I mean, I've never heard that inside the community of viewers that, were trained and worked there. I have not heard, he may have been tested, evaluated at SRI International, but I don't believe at all that he worked there. I mean, he came out of the remote viewing unit and went straight to Monroe Institute, because when he went through the Monroe Institute in the developmental days at INSCOM, when INSCOM was exploring all these things like hemisync tapes and etc. And the idea, there was evaluation. They sent people there to say, well, tell us what you think. Is this something that maybe we want to expand upon? Maybe a contract with the Monroe Institute is there any value in this? Well, as he cycled through that and funneled through it, I heard, I mean, he never told me this. We've never spoken directly, but I heard that, that was where he met Robert Monroe's daughter. And they struck up a relationship. And when he came out of the Army, he went to the Monroe Institute and brought Skip Atwater with him. And now Joe McMoneagle is, I think, president of the Monroe Institute, of the Gateway Program, and Skip Atwater is director of operations. And so they went there. He ended up marrying Robert Monroe's daughter. And I know that there was a deliberate push on the part of Joe and Skip to try to get INSCOM to do a long-term contract with him. And I mean, you can scoff at that, or you can turn and go, well, that's kind of nepotism. Or you could step back and say, oh, the guy's there. He married Monroe's daughter. He's there now. And he's, the INSCOM was paying for people to go through on probably an SF-182, which is just a document where you can pay X amount of dollars, not exceeding, I think, 21,000. And it's called just like a school document, paying that it's contract document, SF-182, to pay somebody to go to school and then come back. And I'm sure that they were looking, could we perhaps get a long-term contract to bring INSCOM personnel through this program? And that's where you start to see those documents where Stubblebine says, I want a detailed assessment of what this does. And bear this in mind. Stubblebine does that, and the current operations officer goes to the gateway program and it writes a detailed assessment of it. He does not recommend it, but he does not recommend it either. And why would that be? It's because he had a relationship with Joe and Skip. So he's not going to just burn it down, but he's also not going to, stick his neck out and say, it's not worth it, or it's of no value to us. There is a CIA document, and I'll send it to you if you need it, that pulls that entire assessment together when the CIA comes in and says, no, it serves no purpose for us. Okay, connect the dots. The CIA has read the review that Stubblebine ordered, and the CIA comes in and says, no, we're not sending people to the gateway program. It's not what we're after. It's not after out-of-body experiences. We want to continue to train remote viewers. Now, the memorandum doesn't say all that, but read between the lines. What it does say is the gateway program is of no value for us. We don't want it. We're not going to fund it. So that's a direct indication that CIA is funding DIA DT-S, or rather not that, but INSCOM at the time. It's funding INSCOM because it's turning around and going, no, you're not going to spend money on that.
I also see the Monroe Gateway Project as like a muddying of the waters too, with having Skip Atwater being kind of in there, and then Joe McMoneagle being in there. It's muddied the waters between the people that think that maybe that they were a part of the Stargate program, and when they really weren't, whenever they were actually a part of the Gateway program at the Monroe Institute, and then it just muddies the waters even more with people thinking that they've actually been a part of a program when they haven't.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I did an interview with another guy that I respect as much as you, and he told me that, hey, I interviewed this guy. And so I looked the guy up and researched him, and I read his entire story about everything. And this guy was either delusional or a liar, or was, completely ignorant of what was actually happening. But he was a radio signal intercept guy. That was his MOS. So he was a signal intercept guy, and then, interpreting signals. And he said that in Japan, he was in Japan, and he was called by General Stubblebine. Now, General Stubblebine is a lot of things, but he does not pick the phone up and call some E6 in Japan and say, I want you to come back to go to the gateway program. You. He didn't do that. So the guy may have thought that he did that, but Stubblebine didn't do that. And then the guy came back and went through the gateway program. And then his attachment to remote viewing in the interview turns around where he says, I got back, I did all these things. And it was years later, decades later, when I realized that I was part of the Stargate program, which was when Psychic Warrior was published. And all of a sudden, and in other things, everybody else tells their stories. And then he finds out, oh, God, INSCOM, and the Stargate, oh God, and HemiSync. And I went through the HemiSync when I was at INSCOM, so I was part of the Stargate program. No, you weren't. You went through the Gateway program. You were not a remote viewer. Again, this thing where nobody understands what remote viewing is, so they just attach the title to themselves. They put it on there, remote viewer. I'm a remote viewer. No, you went to the Gateway program. It's got nothing to do with remote viewing. Remote viewing is not the Gateway program, and the Gateway program is not remote viewing. So, but he's written books talking about his remote viewing prowess. He's doing interviews talking about his remote viewing prowess and how he's part of the Stargate program. He never walked through the door. He didn't even knock on the door. He didn't climb the steps. He was not part of it. But it muddies the water. And again, people don't do as you do, which is pull on the thread and unravel the entire story to say, it's credible, it's not credible. They just keep, in this day and age, it's quite bizarre, isn't it? I mean, it's so easy to step up and just say whatever you want to say and throw it out there and let you don't, there's rarely
Especially in this
accountability.
community. Yeah, exactly. There really isn't. And people can just kind of come up and say whatever they want to say, and then they don't have any counter things said to them, right? They're just, looked at the what they say is like 100% factual. But if someone actually, researches and digs into these people and tries to get to the bottom of the truth, there's going to be discrepancies, right? Like
Sure,
everyone can't, how it's exactly like what you were talking about in the beginning of the show. You were like, hey, like I don't have the entire full picture, and that's very honorable for you to say that, because a lot of people are in every topic, everywhere,
sure.
not
Yeah.
just with remote viewing or things. They're speaking as if absolutely everything that they're saying is 100% factual and can't be debated, and that there's no discrepancies within what they're saying, when that's not the truth.
Don't you find that such an odd development within the global society
Yes.
that that something and I really, I mean, I can speculate, but I don't really understand how we've empowered that. I think it just kind of comes from like people's affection for their enamor of like things like reality TV and other things. I mean, from Twitter to Instagram, something else. It's so easy to present yourself as something you're actually not, something you actually haven't done. And it goes on. I mean, I'm a big watcher of documentaries, and you
Mm.
see this stuff that gets thrown out there, and if you're, as you are, and I think I am, a researcher. I mean, I go dig and I dig deep about what is, what isn't. And it's very interesting to see these people that step up as fakers, that scammers, that do all this stuff, that create these stories and these illusions and these personalities and these other things. And not only lying to thousands or if not millions of people, but, you know, bilking women or men out of their money and their fortunes, destroying companies and doing other things. It's very disconcerting, that we are in this particular phase of the global societal evolution. We are still deeply in a destructive phase, still
Uh,
deeply. We have not pulled back on the horizontal stabilizer. We are not in a climb out of the destructive phase of global societal evolution. And we have been in a very prolonged destructive phase. We're now rapidly approaching, the 30-year mark of a
yeah.
destruct, which actually 35 years is supposed to be. That's kind of the typical cycle within the global societal evolution. 35 years for any of the turnings. I'm kind of paraphrasing Strauss and Howe now, but I'm a absolute believer in that theory and tracking of human timeline. We are in a fourth turning, a destructive phase. 20 years of war, you know, 5 years, and maybe if you pushed it back into the 90s and the destruction that went on there during the .com era, you're at 30 years now. We're at 33 years if you're just counting the decades and rounding up, right? And I don't see relief on the horizon. We have we have warfare on an ever increasing scale of lethality and precision going on in Ukraine with Russia, with threats all around, and China watching. And I don't see what we're doing to stop it. I understand that our current, commander in chief has been talking about deploying a division to a division, an army division into the Ukraine. Well, we all know what that will mean,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you want to see us, enter into a phase of nuclear war, that will be the catalyst for that. It will be. So,
Absolutely, and we can't keep fighting a proxy war. I mean, when does the funding stop? It has to stop it at some point there. And I was talking to somebody about this earlier today before we got on, and I've mentioned it a
mhm.
few times. on this show is, when is humanity going to get a win, right? When are we going to win? When is something actually beneficial for everyone ever going to happen? It has not happened in my lifetime, hasn't happened in
No,
my
you're a young man.
parents' lifetime, it hasn't happened in my grandparents' lifetime. There's been no win for humanity. All the wins that have been has been like disguised as wins, and they weren't really wins, right? It's all
That's
been
an
a bunch of
interesting
nonsense.
perspective. See, being much older than you, I have seen us cycle through many things, and I have seen there's the unfortunate thing, and that I will say is that there's never a true global societal shift where everything has now been collectively decided to be done right, in the interest of the environment, in the interest of humanity. Uh, it's but I have seen wins within our nation. Let's put it that way. I've seen wins. And I'm not talking about combat wins. I'm just talking about wins where we've made the right decisions with the right kinds of leadership and administrators, and we've done the right kinds of things. But then there's, the problem here is we have professional politicians, as does most of the rest of the world. And these are people that are truly not interested in us and not interested in us as a nation and our role within the global society. It's all posturing. It's all marketing. It's all, say the right thing and don't say the wrong thing. They're led by monkeys that steer them, through these various pathways. And typically, these are now leaders who've done nothing, been nowhere except, as an individual paid for by the American taxpayer. All the former, combat aviators, the people who fought in World War II, Vietnam, and then came out of that and migrated into politics. You can tell me if I'm missing somebody. I think they're all dead. They're dead or dying. And so what you have are these people that have stepped into that role for 40 years. And in that role, their role is not about, it's about taking care of their particular patch of Texas or Louisiana or wherever it happens to be. And they don't care about the larger picture. And you can call me a liar or misrepresenting that, and I'll fight you for that statement. Show me where they have. And so part of our problem is we have a system that puts people in the place where they should be, going for wins, as you say, wins in education and healthcare, and wins as a nation, wins and all the things that we need to have put together. And how it can flounder and just continue to do nothing but become a confused soup of lunacy, where we're focused on the wrong kinds of things all the time, right? That is an indicative, that's an indicator of a reactive society that has lost its principles, that is focused on all the wrong kinds of things, and it's focused on get more, have more, that kind of thing. It's not focused on do good, do more good, live your life doing good and building things. It's just about capturing, acquiring, and having more. And living in Lakewood Ranch, Florida, I saw so much of that. Sorry, I'm getting over COVID. I saw so much of that. Guys driving around in $450,000 cars, and I'm just like, what the fuck? If I had the money to buy one of those things, before I'd spend $450,000 on it, I'd go buy, a $50,000 car and figure out how I could use the $400,000 to make a difference in people's lives in some way,
Yeah, it's become about monetary value
But
and
until that
possession.
changes, Ryder, until all of that changes, you're not, until there's a shakeup of our system, maybe a revolution, and until there's a shakeup of our system and we step back and go, this is not working. we can start making changes for us, but I don't know that we're going to be able to influence those kinds of changes across the planet. And therein lies, kind of the death map of the human society, because everybody's about building, their defense arsenal. Look at China and Russia. I mean, everybody's about building more ways to kill people on a larger scale, because and while all of that happens, in between the cracks of all of the, continents and nations, people are raping our seas, people stepping up, wearing lambs clothing, or, like 360 or 350.org, that jerk standing up and, becoming purveyors of things like biomass, power generation, wind and solar and all this other crap. Biomass power generation. Have you ever seen or heard about that stuff? You know what it is? They burn fucking trees. That's what they burn. And the Sierra Club and 350.org own thousands of acres and trees. They're invested in trees. This is Sierra Club and 350.org. And they sell these trees to loggers. That's how they profit. And then loggers take these trees in logging trucks, and instead of it being cut up to be a lumber for a house, what they pulp, they chip them. And so outside these biomass fuel power generation plants, which everybody thinks is sustainable and green, they are burning wood chips, burning mountains of wood chips. So when you hear biomass and when you hear, wood chips and stuff like that, that's the term for that is called a tree. So they're burning and they're butchering, cutting it all down and burning them like that. But they sold it to people as a way to, clean up we can burn trash. We can burn, used wood laying all over the place. We pick up all the dead wood and do it. Yeah, bullshit. I mean, but nobody ever said you can't power a city by picking up trash and, burning it. First of all, if you burn trash, what happens? Toxic fumes from plastic, petroleum's out, right? Do the biomass generators have the ability to scrub that stuff? No, they don't, because the toxics are so wide and spread, they can't build a scrubber to handle something like that. So the cities in which these things exist, the campuses in which these things exist, are covered in black soot that falls down all over the place until they burn just nothing but wood chips. But igniting the wood chips and keeping the wood chips going, they still have to use petroleum based to keep it going. People don't understand the amount of, they don't understand or even question now when you start talking about it, like California, talking about, by 2030, was it 2030, 2035, no more petroleum based cars.
Yep.
Really? But if the temperature rises 3 degrees in the state of California, they have to do rolling blackouts because their grid has never been improved. They've never spent that money. They spend that money in other things that, as I said, they're focused on the wrong things. They spend that money in other stuff, but they cannot maintain their own infrastructure, the power grid for the state or anything else. That's how Enron and greedy, power brokers in Enron were able to rape California and Oregon and other places in selling electricity, because the power grid could not support the demands of the population of those states. So Enron was selling it from states that had an overage of it. That's why they were laughing about trees burning, because the trees burning burned down the power lines and sever it, and they have to spend all this money on that stuff. So now we can sell energy into them, right? It made the prices go up for them because of that. People don't understand what it takes to make a Tesla. They don't get it. You could drive a normal car for 23 years for what it takes to make a Tesla in terms of a carbon footprint. People don't read that stuff.
Yeah, and I
It-
don't know how California thinks it's going to sustain its grid if they don't have any more combustion engine cars anymore. They can barely sustain it now with people having their air conditioners on. There, I lived in California for a while, and they would literally have big signs on their highway, big neon signs that was like, "Be sure to turn your lights off and don't use your air conditioners between such and such time of the evening, or it's going to affect the grid." How do they think that that's going to be sustainable in 2050 whenever there's no more combustion engines? It's not going to be. Like everyone plugging in their electric vehicles at that
takes
time. It's
power
just
from the grid.
exactly.
It's like people think that they plug them into a tree or something, you know? Or there's a plug in the ground and you just plug in it, geothermal generates that. But you have all these people willing to lie about it that should not be lying. Guys like Elon Musk builds his battery plant up in, outside Reno, Nevada. And I saw the video of him standing there telling everybody that this entire battery plant is going to be run on geothermal, solar, and wind energy. And everybody was applauding Elon. Now, I'm not trying to say the guy's an asshole, but I'm trying to say that he lied about that. And maybe some engineer told him to say that, or some marketing person, like I said, a monkey steering him that direction. But he doesn't seem like the type that would do that. But if you go up there and look at that plant, there's a power substation right there, and that plant is plugged into the grid in a big way. And I've seen interviews with people who work at the plant, and they ask the question, "Are you guys using solar energy?" And they're like, "Maybe to power the soda machines, but nothing else." You have an Earth Day celebration. I remember the first Earth Day. I was in high school when the first Earth Day occurred. I will say I understood it, but I didn't necessarily participate because I didn't understand all the specifics and dynamics of it. I was focused on other things. But that first Earth Day, has evolved and continued on. And probably, pre-COVID, there was a huge Earth Day celebration. And the guy that's in charge of the Earth Day celebration stands up and says to the entire crowd of people, this entire concert and everything here at Earth Day is being powered by solar power. And everybody, all these kids that are there to concert, give me some more Molly. They're on and on and on with this thing. And all of us, and somebody with a camera goes around the back and sees a solar array there that, would power a soda machine. I mean, that's what it would do. It was like 40 feet by 20 feet, and it would power something like maybe the lights in the trailer or something until it got dark. But the guy asks the guy, because he sees these massive, millions of kilowatt generators, diesel generators fired up, and he says, is this thing being powered by solar? And the guy's like, no. He goes, they're being powered by those generators up there. So here's Earth Day. The guy stands up and tells everybody a bald face lie, and not one person ever questions it. Not one person ever says, really? Like, how are you doing that? This is a massive concert, because nobody takes the time to figure out in photovoltaics what it means to power something like that. How much does it actually generate? What size field do you need to generate enough kilowatt hours to make something happen like that? Yeah,
It would
about
have to be 10 times bigger than the place that you're actually.
it'd be like 8 football fields.
Yep.
It'd be a solar array like 8 football fields to power that entire event. And then people don't even ask, what does it take to make a solar cell? They should. You see things on television that show sand, and then they'll say, this is what we do to make, for the photovoltaics for your house, which will be free. No, that's not the sand. They have to use a very specific sand. It has to be a very pure crystallite sand, not silica sand, crystallite sand. It's crystals in sand form. And that has to be mixed with the very, very purest coal. And the way that's mixed to form the photovoltaics that will be used in layers requires a huge amount, like upwards of 1,500 to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, to melt these two things together. And people think, and then they put it together, and then photovoltaics the technology at this point, it doesn't last. At around the 7 to 8 year point, it starts to degrade in its ability to operate its photovoltaic capabilities. So by the time it gets out to 10, 11, 12 years, it's now an ability that's like 30%, 18%. You can't power your house with it. So what do you have to do? Well, because you're stupid and you got the free deal to put all those panels up there, which came from China, by the way. In 10 years, you're going to be going, shit. And so now same guy that put them up there the first time is going to be back and go, here's the price tag to swap them all out, but it'll be the latest. And
anybody that doesn't believe what you're saying, they should go by a town or a city that has a plastic manufacturing plant in their city, right? Have you ever been to a city that has a plastic manufacturing plant in it? It stinks up the
I actually
entire
have. It was San
city.
Clemente, California. Yeah. I lived Reeves. It was called Reeves Rubber. And yeah, they made remember the Super Balls? Well, you're so young. You wouldn't know that. They made Super Balls, which you would like drop the ball and it would the rebound capability
Bounce
of the
back.
ball was it would go up higher than just where you dropped it from. So they called them Super Balls. And they were highly sought after. But Reeves Rubber made everything plastic or rubber in the city of San Clemente, right next to the Hunt's tomato sauce plant. So Beach City. I don't even know if
Yeah,
that's still there, but Beach City, right? Home of Nixon's summer White House.
I'm pretty sure
So
it.
yeah.
Yeah, I've been to San Clemente quite a bit. It goes Dana Point and then Laguna Beach, Dana Point, and then San Clemente's after
Mhm.
Dana Point, though. Yeah, but yeah, if go to a city that has a plastic manufacturing plant in it, and you'll realize how bad plastic is and how much they burn it, and it stinks up the entire town and the entire city. It's really, really bad for everyone and everything, and not only for the environment and everything. But let's uh let's get back to the Stargate here. We got a little off track on there, which is perfectly okay and fine. I just wanted to kind of close up the whole topic on the Stargate and how it got developed into the Army intelligence getting interested in psychics and remote viewers. That's one thing that we've gotten through SRI and all that, and where the funding came from SRI. But how
Sure.
did the Army intelligence get interested in psychic research in the beginning? Was it from SRI and funding SRI that they became interested, or were there? Because from my understanding, there's a couple of events that happened with some of the test subjects from SRI that really got the Army intelligence and the DIA interested in opening up their own psychic research.
Well, I don't know, quite honestly, how General Burt Stubblebine became so enamored of all of this, but I do know that he did. And so I'm assuming it's just, again, me piecing together history from my perspective of it. And I spent, time with Stubblebine on several occasions when he was retired from the Army. I mean, even having dinner at Ed Dames's house, talking about the origins of and what they were working on and why, etc. I would not think that it would be far-fetched to say that he became enamored of this because somebody started pitching him or feeding him information about what SRI was discovering and what the capability was. I would also, you have to give recognition to the era where leaders at all levels within the Pentagon of all branches of service were being introduced to things at the end of the Vietnam War that were by today's terms outrageous. I mean, by outrageous, I mean, I love Lieutenant Colonel Jim Channon, and I loved what he was trying to do with First Earth Battalion, etc. And I really hate the people who scoffed at him and tried to stand on his vision and make it a tongue-in-cheek bullshit thing. I really dislike those people for that. Shannon just passed away recently, but he was briefing 258 slides, some odd, give take, in the Pentagon to four-star generals. So people were hearing things that were metaphysical, esoteric, psychic, and there was the rumors of the research and what was going on, and validated scientifically, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm sure that Stubblebine was part of hearing that. And once you hear that, then if you think as a two-star general that there's something to that, you're going to turn around to your deputy and say, find out what you can find out about this. Or maybe the agency came in, had a sit down with the two-star general and said, hey, how would you like to have a piece of this? How would you like to explore this? How would you like to see if this was real? We've been doing it at SRI International. We got some teams working there, but how would you like to do this? Stubblebine was, a big spoonbender fan, marching soldiers into the post theater where the INSCOM was located. And you're talking like, I don't know, 500, let's say, maybe 1,000 soldiers being marched in there with mess hall spoons, trays of mess hall spoons and forks or knives. And he would say, the direction was pick one of these up. And so now you have all these soldiers in uniform sitting in there. And, then he would bring somebody up on stage and walk them through a spoon bending exercise, utilizing the power of their mind to alter the molecular structure of the spoon. It was met with mixed results and mixed, fanfare and feedback, but he didn't give a shit. He just kept doing it. He went to HemiSync and bought from the Monroe Institute HemiSync tapes, Catnapper, Sound Sleeper. I don't know what the series was to improve your work performance and focus. I think it was called Focus something. And then I used to have the entire set of the Russian language series. I couldn't ask for where a bathroom is in Russian. And I went through the entire series of subliminal learning tapes for how to speak Russian. I thought it might come in handy someday. But people still tell stories about that, older NCOs that may still be alive or officers that talk about the fact that around the INSCOM headquarters, around INSCOM proper in Washington, D.C., that soldiers would be walking around wearing Sony Walkmans with the headphones and a cassette in there that was a HemiSync tape. And they would walk around, it was like part of their duty uniform. You were okay to have that on because you were supposed to be learning something, or was supposed to be subliminal messaging to you, to increase focus and work performance. You know what I mean? All these things. And Stubblebine initiated that and put it there. So I'm sure if they, between spoon bending and HemiSync, and the fact that Joe and Skip were already at HemiSync when that was going, as I recall, the idea that, hey, we got a remote viewing program, it needs a home. Pull it out of the Pentagon, basement or wherever it was at that time, or we need a house for it. Would you be willing to take it? And I'm sure his first decision, given how enamored he was with all of this, would have been absolutely. Now, I don't know if his comptroller would have turned around and said, well, how are we going to pay for it? Because this was a time when the military, all of them, had greatly reduced budgets. Why? We're done. We just came out of 10 years of the Vietnam War. We've spent billions, trillions on this war. And now, as it always does, they turn around and they start doing reductions in force. So you don't have to pay retirement for these guys. Guys got 18 years in. We're sorry, here's your pink slip. There'll be a meeting, in the theater in 4 hours where they can talk to you about becoming a manager at Taco Bell or, at McDonald's. I'm not kidding you. I'm not making this up. I've seen lieutenant colonels weeping at their desks. Because why? They have 18 years in, and now they're going to get reduced. Reduction in force, RIF, it's called. All All the entire military infrastructure was essentially dissolving. You know where they are right now in the Army? Right now in our Army, they're at they're at the lowest enlistment and reenlistment rate that they have been in 50 years. The lowest enlistment and reenlistment rate. Our numbers of soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guard is diving to a very low point and a weakened point. Why? Because they're not putting in the money to bring them in. They reduce the force. They're cutting budgets. And I've been through that before. Walking to training because you don't have the fuel to put in your trucks. Tanks doing dry fire drill inside the motor pools. Why? They don't have the money to send the tank. They cut the budget. You don't have the fuel to drive there. It's only going to be certain special times you're going to do that. So Stubblebine is going through all of that. So if somebody turns around and says, because I know the comptroller would ask that question, like, what are we going to do to pay for this? I'm sure Stubblebine or whoever his deputy was that was working that probably turned right around to the agency that pitched them and said, you going to give us some money? And that's just a lateral transfer of that funding, through some disguised, non-traceable, trail, paper or electronic, where that money shows up in the INSCOM budget. Don't tell me that they fielded that organization and they just did it out of internal monies. Not that it was greatly expensive, but don't tell me they did that, because they were at the point where they, practically you'd have to go to a supply sergeant and ask for paper clips, and he'd say, how many do you want? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not like, here's a box of paper clips. It'd be like, you can have 3. Yeah. And that was the way it was in those days. I mean, you couldn't get paper for typewriters. You couldn't get ribbons. It was nuts. That was the Army I walked into, So I think that all of that is how that happened for Bert Stubblebine, enamored of it to begin with, and then basically asked the question, do you want to house this project? And then if he said yes, given the era, he would have asked, where's the money going to come from? And I'm sure that, it wasn't going to come from Big Army. Big Army didn't have the money to give him. So it would have had to come somewhere else. It probably came from the agency.
Now, is there any proof that the Soviet Union was that they did have programs like what the United States was doing? Because that's how the story goes from like a lot of people.
Sure. Yeah, I got an answer.
Is that the Soviet Union was doing this kinds of research, and then we had to you had to be up to date with the Soviet Union so they don't collect intelligence data. If they're doing this, then we also need to be doing this. But I haven't stumbled upon any solid proof or evidence that the Soviet Union was, for a fact, doing this kind of research.
This is one of those things. It's a very good question, Ryder. Thank you for asking. It's one of those things I don't think you'll ever get to the bottom of, because there are too many spinning ideologies and concepts in this. Is there proof? There's as much proof there as there was about WMD in Iraq. There's as much proof there as there was about yellow cake, being purchased, and aluminum tubes being produced and shipped into Iraq. There's as much proof of that, meaning that it was human intelligence sources. And people always when I say this thing about remote viewing and its levels of accuracy, and I say that it was always intended to be a piece of the collection puzzle, nothing in the intelligence collection machine is 100% accurate. There's not one thing that's 100% accurate. I don't care if it's signal, photo, whatever it is. What does it ultimately have to be dealt with, hands-on, by a human? So and thank God for that, I tell you. Thank God it's not an AI computer making decisions about intelligence and threats, etc. But no matter what it is, it has to be looked at and interpreted by a human. And they try based on their training, be as factual as they possibly can. But in that world, there are so many corrupted fissures and cracks that are in there. You don't ever really know what you're getting is true or false. Just like the guy that fed the intel, right, to the White House that said, oh, there are what WMDs. I know there are. I've seen them, kind of thing. Not enough people ask the critical questions. And so we invaded a country based on that premise, maybe by design, maybe just out of stupidity, and maybe because we believed the lie of somebody who had an objective after Saddam was gone, all of the above. So no, I've never seen proof of it at all either. And it goes like to the end of the Cold War. We're now in our second Cold War, but at the end of the Cold War, what was one of the great discoveries that we made? The discovery we made was that the Soviet Union did not have as many military personnel as we originally thought they did. They did not have as many tank armies as we were led to believe that they did. They did not have as many nuclear warheads as we suspected or knew that they did. They didn't have as many. They had as many surface warships, but we didn't know how many submarines that they had. So the whole illusion of the industrial complex is help to support the illusion that your enemy, real or perceived, has this and you need this to counter it. And that's what happens in our world. It happens every day, every second. That same pitch is being made on some level for great profits for somebody, which is the enemy has this, and so you need this. And as we found at the end of the Cold War, there was a great deal of misinformation and illusion that we as a nation had been fed by our own fucking people because of the interest of greed. In the interest of greed, we were responding to and spending, copious amounts of money on a scale unimaginable to normal human beings to prepare to defend, to fight against the numerical superiority of the technical superiority of this real or perceived enemy. Well, the Soviet Union was definitely our enemy. Let's agree on that. But we were out of control, and ultimately they were out of control. Now, if you talk to people in the intel community who, kind of were part of this process, they take credit for that as though it was their overall strategic strategy, which was to allow us to spend money in the defense industrial complex to create this massive defensive, offensive capability. And that in so doing that, we bankrupted the Soviet Union. So is all of that true? I'll bet you a part of it's true, but is it the absolute truth? You're not going to snow me that easily. No, it was spy versus spy versus spy versus spy, like the Mad Magazine thing. It was the most appropriate, illustration of how this whole world is working in that respect. And did we launch off and develop a capability based on human intelligence? Yeah. And we've seen how accurate that is in multiple occasions throughout our history. Human intelligence alone is insufficient to make something actionable. But we've never learned that lesson. So we continue to make those kinds of mistakes. We act on something. But in this particular case, developing psychic capabilities or as a remote viewer, I think of all the damage done, within the intel community on things that they have ventured into that they thought were well worth the effort and the human cost, the human toll, short and long term, like MK Ultra and beyond. This was nothing. This was, like I said, this was chump change to them. It was a nothing investment. And that's why I also say I know that they didn't just do away with it. They
I
just
agree.
diverted them off to other places where they think it's not going to be, and they probably lowered the hammer. Well, they did what I told you last time. They made it LIMDIS, not SAP. It's no longer a special access program. Now it's limited dissemination. That carries heavier penalties.
Well, this question has evolved for me because the question I'm getting ready to ask you, and I asked you it last time as well, but it's evolved for me because of the more research and the more people that I've talked to, which is the biggest question that I think anybody would have that's studied this at any depth is why did the CIA shut down the project, right? And I've really been looking into this and trying to figure out why they would do so whenever when they had known everything all about the project, before the CIA took it back over in 95. So they were funding SRI this entire time. We've established that they've been funding it for like 20 years since 1972. They've been funding SRI now. There's discrepancies there if they cut the funding, blah, 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 for a period of time. But I think it's safe to say that they continued the funding regardless. Right. So they already knew they had already been funding it for a really long time. And then they get their hands on the project from the DIA. It was supposed to be transferred to the CIA. They get their hands on the project and then they just wipe their hands of it. They're like, yeah, there wasn't any. It was Bill, what's his name? I can't remember his name. He was the director of the CIA at
Right.
the time. He came out and said, oh, yeah, there wasn't ever any valuable data collections or data
Yeah.
information, intelligence information that was ever collected from this unit. So we're basically shutting it down. And when does the military or a three-letter organization ever keep something going for 18 to 20 years that they don't find any value in, right?
Well, they don't. And it's a very good question. And I will speculate for you. They cite, people often don't really grasp the severity of a serving decorated Army officer violating a secrecy oath and writing a book about a classified special access program that he was part of and just saying, I'm going to do it. And I did it. Not to whine about what it was like in the program, but to say how transformational it was. And then to, articulate things that were being done to me in an effort to stop the book publication of the book. I started to write the book in 93. This is the timeline. They knew by 93 and a half that St. Martin's had made an offer on the book, which I had accepted, with Sean Coyne as the editor. And that the exchange back and forth between Sean and I was now underway. By 94, the book was circling around through the legal circuit, being vetted, names. And there were people like Lynn and Mel Riley who were asked to sign affidavits that how they are portrayed in the book is accurate, even though their names were changed. And both did. And that meant, it had passed the legal vetting process. So now we're in 94 and they have printed galleys by early 95. When there were printed galleys in early 95, there were still efforts afoot to call the publisher and stop the book. And Paul Smith was part of that. And I know he was because I was told by a colleague in the unit who was still active that Paul was heading this effort up. And they knew finally, because St. Martin's turned around and said, we're printing this thing, we're going to make it happen. And then the cover, the design on the cover, this blue design, it wins an international marketing award. So the book, it starts, it's like climbing up not because of me and how I wrote it, but because of that cover on the book. And so like by 94, you start to see these things trickling out, right, out into the press about this program. And then by 95, you start to see more of it, right? And then the CIA does this thing called, we're going to do a FOIA release of documents, because as the book was going up, the agency was going, we're going to take this thing down so that, you know, the two paths converge and cross, which was, while one person is talking about the organization and what it was like and how transformational it was, nightmarish at sometimes, and then what the government was doing to stop it, the government is rapidly, CIA, rapidly shutting this thing down to try to what? You've got to destroy the evidence. You got to get rid of it. You have to denounce it. You have to say that it didn't exist. Or if it did, which it did, if it did, you have to minimize it. And you have to minimize the amount of money that you spent on it. You have to minimize it by attacking people. You have to minimize it by, you know, by saying that that work was not credible. You have to give all kinds of excuses for saying why you're shutting it down now. You suddenly, a guy like Jim Schnabel shows up, and nobody's smart enough to know that Jim Schnabel he's a paid for, his father worked in the CIA. And now Schnabel shows up to write the book Remote Viewers, and he's a strategic writer. I mean, that's a title applied to guys that do that. They go around, if you read every one of his books, Dark, White, Rounded Circles, and Remote Viewers, it never, ever addresses the reality or the feasibility of, you know, any of the concepts. Rounded Circles was about crop circles. Dark White was about alien abductions. Remote viewing was about remote viewing, but it wasn't those. It was a way to build up, single out, and attack the people that worked in any of those things, because that's how you continue the process of discrediting any of that. You make it out to make this look like, oh, look how crazy these people were. I mean, look how lunatic this is. You wouldn't do that, would you? I mean, you would never be part of something like that, would you? That's the premise of all the books. That's kind of the arc he follows in it. He singles people out and attacks them. And then all of a sudden, you got to hear this. That same guy, because his book does not come out in hardcover. Psychic Warrior does. But his book gets tossed down to mass market paper. He's like, oh, you know, he was really pissed about that. And then the next thing that happens is he shows up with like $450,000 of money from BBC, Channel 4, to do a documentary about remote viewing. And so he does it. But if you look at that documentary, if it's still out there, it is the most subtle but in your face attack of all the people that are in it. It's like you have, you know, General Thompson, now retired. He's been interviewed as part of but as they're driving away, he's standing out on the sidewalk waving, and they encapsulate him post, you know, in post, in the editing, in a purple haze. Here's a general waving to everybody in slow-mo with a purple haze around him. They go to Mel Riley, and, you know, the big finishing crescendo out of the interview of him talking about how everything is, he's wearing a Native American headdress, you know, feathers and crap sticking everywhere that he made, but he's not Indian, but he made this thing and it was perfect. And they show him in that with this white haze around him in his teepee that he has in his backyard in the back. So these are subtle, you know, implants for people looking at it going, these people are fucking weird. And goes that
Looney
whole
Tunes.
way through the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but nobody ever said, who is this guy? Where did he come from? Science writer. What's he actually written? You know, what does he actually do? Where does he get his paychecks from, etc.? He's a strategic writer for the agency. That's what he is. So that's the plan. That's why it was stopped. It was stopped because they had to figure out a way to explain to the American people how this came about and why they used it for so long, and then why they stopped it. And usually, as I said early on in this interview, is most people will turn around and go, oh, okay. Yeah. All the people involved in it are the weirdos. The government was just experimenting. They just wanted to see. It was only $20,000. I mean, come on, $20,000 over 20 years, that's nothing. And through people's heads and done. So, but then everybody else got to write their books once my book came out, right?
I'm going to give you my thoughts and my opinions on this, and just kind of roll with me on it. I haven't
Sure.
mentioned it to anybody that's been involved in the project, any of the people that I've interviewed so far. I've only talked about it on like other people's shows. So level one of this, like I'm going to go through a few different theories. So level one is it legit really didn't produce any valuable intelligence data, so they scrapped the whole thing completely, which is highly unlikely, right?
Mhm.
Level two is the cat was let out of the bag, and they wanted to, save the embarrassment of having a legit program using psychics, so they shut it down. It's kind of like what you just went into. And level three is the government didn't want the public to know these abilities exist, and that everybody basically has the capacity to remote view. So they did everything they could to discredit the program and everyone involved. Level four is, well, it could have been because the CIA already had a special access program using remote viewers and psychics, and that's why they shut it down. You know, do they were funding it the entire time, so they pretty much knew everything about it. So that one kind of makes sense. Now, level five is what I really think is the huge missing link to all this, which I find most plausible. And it's something that people don't talk about. And if they do know about it, they don't talk about it. Right. And through all of my research and talking with people that's been in this program like yourself, and putting two and two together, is that I think that they found another application for remote viewing and psychic abilities. And they couldn't do
Which
it.
would be,
They couldn't do this out in the open, right? Not even out in the open as far as a special access program, right? It had
yeah,
to be even more secret than that, like above top secret, right?
yeah,
And the Stargate Project and SRI was just like a testing and an experimentation to see how far these abilities could really go, until they really figured out what they wanted to do with it, which was and which is remote control and remote influencing, right? I believe that the psychic spies research and the psychic spies program collecting data and intelligence information turned into a psychic assassins program, right? Either killing people outright with their mind, which would be a lazy way to do it, right? Or influence someone else to do the assassination or the killing for them, which would create a lot more political upheaval than just outright killing somebody with your mind, right? You'd want to convince someone else to do the killing for you, right? My friend Shane Sador kind of put it like this, which I'm going to repeat what he said. I was talking to him on an interview I did with him. It would be like Osama bin Laden, dying in a cave, right? Who cares if he died in a cave, right?
yes.
Instead, for optics, they send in SEAL Team 6, tracking him down and killing him. Looks better. And I'm pretty dang sure this was the real purpose of this program and what it evolved into. And they couldn't carry the people that was from the Stargate unit into this new program, except maybe one or two. And the jury's still out on which one of those people they are.
Can I respond?
Yes.
Can I respond? Well, as usual, you do a really good job of researching and putting pieces together. I think number two is accurate. I think the level three is accurate. Level 4 is accurate. And I think that there is to a degree accuracy in level 5. But I believe it was a combination of all 4 of those that prompted this. A crisis erupts, the forest starts to burn in the center of the forest. So what are we going to do next? Do we just scrap this program and waste all the money and things we found out? Or do we ratchet it up a notch and use it for things, what's the next application? The language applied to that is called mission creep, which means that we started out this way, but now we need to move to something else, mission creep into something else, redefine what we're going to do with this, and shut all evidence of the pre-existing program down as best we can. Get rid of it because, pardon me, the national memory is short. So really fucking short. If you look back over history, I mean, we move on to the next thing, whether it's the next new McDonald's deal, food deal on television, or, people, again, I'm going to say it, just focus on the wrong kinds of things. And these entities that are out there, these organizations, part of their way in which they continue to live, exist, and, become what they are is their ability to understand the pulse of both the global society and the national society, and even the political society, and how do they manipulate it. Don't for a moment think that that is not what they do. And so to take individuals that have a proven ability because of training to do certain things, the idea that you could expand that to the next level as like a remote interject assassin or a remote assassin, or I think primarily, I mean, if they could make that happen, of course they would make it happen. But just to be a remote influencer, to be able to cause a moment of indecision in a global leader, shall we say, right? Or to influence them in some way to have angst when they otherwise didn't need it, or fear, or fear and paranoia in some way, or remote influence blood pressure, or remote influence other things. Is that a possibility? I've always said this to anybody that asks me. Yeah, of course it is. I mean, everything is energy, and energy is everything, and therefore everything can be expressed in wave form on some level. And if you come in with a powerful enough waveform inherent to a specific target individual, and the amplitude and the frequency of that waveform is strong enough, concentrated, focused on that thing, it causes the waveform of that, shall we say, entity, the target, it causes it to sympathetically resonate with it. It comes in and it disrupts the waveform pattern that exists for the target, and it has the ability to overpower it. And it's a destructive waveform interference that then causes the lesser waveform to sympathetically resonate with it. It's, Itzhak Bentov called that, he called it, it just fell out of my head. You go entrainment. So if you walk into a room where you realize suddenly that you're not wanted in that room, how does that happen? I mean, nobody stands up and goes, get out of here. But you walk into a room, and just with the waveform expression of their energy that comes through their eyes, their expressions, right? You sense that. And when you exit that environment, if they continue that, do you increase in angst or decompress down into total relaxation? You know the answer to that. The more they focus on that, it doesn't matter where you go. The more you focus at the speed of thought, you are processing and you feel that. Why? Because that waveform expression that they're carrying and focusing on an intent, it doesn't have to travel distance. because those waveforms are omnipresent, right? As your waveform is omnipresent. So there's a piece of you, your waveform, that is still attached to that environment. So the more they intensify that, you feel it because you are omnipresent and the waveform is omnidirectional. Every possible path, theirs and yours. You cannot escape it. So if they are trained, and what I would think would be a very evil, dark application of this human ability, if they are trained, could they do that? Absolutely. And if you don't think that would be real, then there's a lot of things from the world of physics, quantum mechanical physics, that you need to start looking at and understand how that could actually happen. Could just anybody off the street do it? No. They could probably make you feel uneasy, right? But to have somebody that could actually cause indecision or fear, paranoia, that might result in let's say, a heart attack. Not that they're like stopping the heart, but that they are raising all of the physiological indicators in this person that ultimately result in, disruption or death or illness. Like George Bush, president, stumbles out of a meeting with, a dinner and throws up over in the corner. There was speculation that he was being remote influenced when that happened. This was George Bush Sr. He comes out of a meeting or a dinner and like throws up over in a corner, and everybody was like, holy shit, the president just vomited on camera. I don't think you can find that footage anymore, but yeah. So yeah, I think your theory is accurate. It didn't die. They didn't do away with it. They migrated it elsewhere where they have more control over it. There's nothing above top secret, but there is top secret, and then lambda, all these different things they can add to it.
Subcategories.
These different categories.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Good work.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for listening to that. I felt comfortable speaking to you about it because we'd already talked before, and I didn't want to bring it up to really anybody else because don't have like that kind of dialogue with people, but we've been talking a lot, emailing back and forth and stuff. And
yeah,
that's just really
I'm
my
sorry
conclusion
about that for you. I'm sorry that people are that way, but yeah, you do good work.
Thank you. Appreciate that a lot, Dave. Not to end on like a bad note or anything, but I wanted to ask you this question before I let you go here tonight.
Sure.
I meant to ask you the last time that we were interviewed, and someone brought it up in the chat on our last episode together. From my understanding, whenever around the time that your book was getting ready to come out, you like there was an attempt on your life, or the attempt on your family's life, or there was something revolving around that, correct? Yeah, could you speak about that?
Yeah, there were two. There were two attempts. I was driving, I was driving a Mercedes S-Class. It was really stupid. I spent a big piece of my advance, my book advance, to get a car. And anyway, while all this was happening, I was driving back home from Fort Bragg, but the car where I stayed or where I lived, I had a rented room because I was separated legally from my wife. Somebody had apparently cut the tires, and there's a way to cut a tire. I've never done it, but there's a way to cut a tire where you cut across the tread down to the belt, and then you do a cut down the belt, and you do that so that the flap is like in the direction of travel. And so what happens is, as you pick up speed, the faster you go, and the faster you go, as the tire heats up, as it flaps like that, that opens up and eventually disintegrates all the way around the tread. That's how it was explained to me by a police officer. And it does that, and they do it in the rear tires because you can steer the front tires, but in the rear, if you're going high enough speeds, like highway speeds, 75 miles an hour, when those tires disintegrate, one at the time or both at a time, you lose control of the vehicle. And then you've got an uncontrolled vehicle at 75 miles an hour. And the intention is to kill you or maim you. So that happened. And pardon me. And then during an ice storm in Bowie, where we were living at the time, I'd come back to visit the family, which I often did. And there was an ice storm. So it was surreal. All the trees were covered in ice, like a half inch of ice. It was like the world was glazed, and there was not a lot of snow, but maybe a foot everywhere else. And the whole family had gone to bed because I slept on the couch because we were separated. I was down on the couch and the dog, we had a German Shepherd by the name of Cynthia, and we had a cat by the name of Ranger, which was a Siamese cat. And I was kind of watching TV and just laying on a couch, and it was in this, attached room to the main house. And I was just feeling like I was getting ready to just drift off to sleep. And all of a sudden, the cat, Ranger, stands up, and I'm watching him, and he tries to walk on the floor, and he just starts moving sideways, and he falls down, and he lets out this noise that I just never came out of a cat before. Quite bizarre. And so I stand up to go see if he's okay. And I'm basically doing the same thing he was doing. I'm kind of sidestepping and I have no equilibrium. And I'm like, holy shit, something's wrong here. And the dog's not even getting up. And she would usually, if I stood up, Cynthia would stand up. She's not getting up. So I move over to the door, which is the back door. It's only 10 feet away. And I try to crawl over there to this thing, and I reach up and unlock it, and I open it up, and the fresh air comes in. And I move out into the fresh air. And I still remember it because it was this amazing moon shining through these trees that had no leaves on them, but they were covered in ice. And it was a strange, surreal experience to be out there, probably because of the hypoxia that I was experiencing in my brain, right? Mm-hmm. And, sucking in large lungfuls of fresh air. And then it's like, holy shit, the kids, Debbie, so I run upstairs, I grab Debbie first, and I say, there's something going on. We need to get the kids up and get them downstairs. Everybody's, there's something going on, gas or something, gas leak, something. So she goes to get Danielle and Mariah, and I go get Michael up, and Michael's teenager. So Michael gets up, and I said, look, you need help. And we got the kids, everybody outside downstairs. And, we bring the animals out as well. And so everybody's just breathing and breathing. Danielle and Mariah, whose room was over the garage, were almost comatose. I mean, almost comatose. They were cyanotic. Their lips, were turning blue. And Debbie, got them up and got them downstairs. She was either in nursing school or she was already an RN. I can't remember at this point. got them downstairs, obviously, but Michael had to help her carry him down. So I go back in the house and dial 911, and the fire department and a police officer show up. And so I explain what happened just as I did to you. And then the police officer, it was either the police officer or the firefighters, but the paramedics were taking care of the kids and other things. And I was okay at that point, as was Debbie. Nobody was hospitalized. They were all on oxygen, and then they were okay, right? And the firefighters were venting the house. And then they opened the garage up, and there's a Generac generator. That's my generator. And I pulled that generator was there because ice storms cut the power all the time. And they did that time. So I moved the Generac generator out onto the driveway next to my car and fired it up. And I just ran extension cords back into the house and then powered up the things that we needed powered up, the fridge, the freezer, the television, those kinds of things, and closed the door back down because everybody up and down the street did that. That was kind of the protocol. Well, the firefighters said, and pointed out to the police officer that there were two sets of footprints that had come up in the snow, that came from the street through the snow, which was only that deep. So the footprints were
Still there,
significant. You could see them very easily, and had picked the generator up and then speculated that the garage door was open, put the generator in the garage door and closed the garage door. And then you could see the footprints going back out. Two people. The police officer said, I'm going to tell you, I think it's two men, but they did that. And then they started speculating, because you think anybody would have done something to you or tried to kill you or something. And I sort of half-assed told him the story because I didn't want to say, psychic warrior, and shit like that, because I was afraid he would go, oh, I see what happened here.
Yeah.
So he said, well, if somebody's really trying to discredit you and stop you from doing something, he said, let's just project this forward. Had you fallen asleep on the couch, he said, in the morning, they would have found everybody in that house dead, including the cat and the dog. And they would have said, this guy lost his mind and killed his family and himself. That's the story that would have been pitched, which I found that to be quite profound from this police officer saying that. He goes, I'm not putting that in the report. He goes, but I'm telling you, if somebody really wants to stop you from doing something, this would have been a way to do it. And he goes, I'm going to tell you, nobody would have thought any different. Because of what's going on with you right now, people would have turned around and said, killed everybody in his house, just ended it all. So yes, that's the answer to those two things. And that was a long time ago. And those children are grown and gone and doing their own thing. And Debbie is happily married to a firefighter of all things. And I'm happy for her. So yeah, it did happen. Now, do I think that the CIA had my mug pinned up on a target board somewhere and went, get this guy? Nah, I don't think that. The agency's not that stupid. But there are people in our country that'll kill somebody for a hot dog. So does somebody who knows somebody else say, we need to get this guy? Are there lower level folks within the agency or DIA maybe who are insulted that I destroyed their program or something, when that was not my intent to destroy it? It was to reveal it. But yeah, that's how that happened. I'm absolutely convinced of that. It wasn't sanctioned, take Morehouse out, but it was certainly somebody operating in a cubicle somewhere who had, had capability to find somebody that would be capable of doing that.
Well, just like basically this entire interview, we've been talking about funneling money in other directions. It's very possible that one of these organizations were paying somebody, and then another person was paying another person, and that person was paying another person, and then they came down the line to try and take you out or take your family out. But that's their MO, right? That's their MO.
Absolutely, it is. Yeah,
to make it look like it was the person that died's fault that they died. Called suicided. He gets you by suicided. But Dave, thanks so much for coming back on my show. I appreciate you a lot. I really enjoyed and love the conversation. Can you you're welcome back on here at any time, of course, anytime you want to.
Up to you or your viewers. I'm at your disposal.
Thank you so much, Dave. Can you let people know where they can find you online? I think you said last time that your main website was down.
Yeah, the website's down. I'll let you know. It's down because I'm taking it over from the people that were running it. So, because I'm dissatisfied with what they were doing. But anyway, it'll be maybe a month or so before it's rebuilt to where it needs to be.
Awesome. I will get the link to purchase your book on Amazon, though, for anyone that's interested or wants to purchase your book. And for everyone else, thanks so much for listening and watching. Much love to everyone in the chat. Please be sure to hit the thumbs up button to help the channel in the YouTube algorithm, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon as well for notifications. And remember, we're not only in a spiritual war, but a war on humanity. Stay aware, stay alert, keep loving your heart for everyone, stay safe out there. And if you can see through the illusion, you are the solution. See you guys next time.
Thanks, everyone.